Hi, I'm Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. Thank you for joining us on We Don't Have to Choose. Today, we are going to talk about the Hennepin County Attorney's Office work on expungements. Expungements are kind of a mystery to people who haven't worked with them. And fortunately, today we have our two office experts, Nadia El-Negdi and Peggy Larkin, to explain exactly what expungements are, how you get one, and the impact that they've had on people in our community. We're here with Nadia El-Negdi, who is one of our experts on expungements. Nadia, can you tell people about your experience in the office with expungements?
Sure. I started work with expungements in 2019. And initially, I was just staffing the expungement calendar. So people who are asking the courts to have their records sealed have a set time to do so. It's every Thursday morning. And so I was reading petitions and I was responding, either agreeing, objecting, or taking no position on their asks, and then sitting in court and answering the judge's questions when necessary.
So these are people who just on their own without counsel, they could have counsel, but I'm imagining most people can't afford to hire a lawyer.
It was probably about 50-50, but you're right. I think going rates for an expungement are $3,000 to $6,000 for each one. So it's a pretty cost prohibitive mechanism or process if you're not familiar with it. Absolutely.
So you were staffing the calendar that the court had.
Yep.
On behalf of the county attorney's office and responding, as you said, agreeing or disagreeing or taking no position.
Exactly.
So it was essentially a reactive approach by the office.
Yes, entirely.
What happened then?
Then we decided to shift our perspective a little bit. The research shows that probably only about 5% of eligible records are actually being sealed, mostly because the process itself is entirely unknown, or even if you do know it exists, it's really inaccessible for a number of reasons. Reading the statute, the language itself, super opaque, very, very difficult to understand, even though the concept is simple. Like you mentioned, do I need a lawyer? And if I do need a lawyer, can I afford one? And if I decide that I'm going to do it by myself, there's still a $400 filing fee. There's still taking time off of work to come downtown for a court hearing. There's just barrier after barrier that we're stopping eligible individuals from seeking to have their records sealed. And so what we started doing was taking cases that were prosecuted by our office, because that's the power that we have, the limits of the power that we have. And we were reviewing cases who had been referred to diversion, our diversion program, which is usually reserved for first-time felony offenders, to give them an opportunity to avoid having a felony conviction on their record. And so you go to a diversion program usually for about a year. You have a bunch of conditions. If you satisfy those conditions, then at the end of that year, your case can be dismissed. And so we were pulling diversion dispositions, cases that had successfully completed diversion, and then just checking them to see if they had met the requirements for expungement, which is...
So I was just going to jump in there. So
Yeah.
let's circle back to what exactly is expungement?
Yes, that's a great question. So expungement is the process by which people can go about having their records sealed or hidden from public view. So the records aren't destroyed, they're just hidden.
So we're talking about somebody with a criminal conviction.
Yes.
And what records are we talking about having sealed?
So there are a number of different kinds of records that are eligible for seal, and it all sort of depends on how the case resolved. Expungements is really about two things. It's about your involvement, the severity of the behavior at the time of the offense, and then what have you done since then to demonstrate rehabilitation. So essentially, have you maintained a clean criminal history for a requisite amount of time? And so records that are eligible for seal are any record that has been dismissed. So that's a straight up dismissal from the prosecutor or the courts, or an acquittal at trial. Any misdemeanor conviction after a 2-year waiting period, any gross misdemeanor conviction after a 3-year waiting period, any listed felony. So the expungement statute literally has a list of felony level convictions that are eligible to be sealed. And so if your crime is on one of those that's on the list, then after 4 years, you can ask the court to have those records sealed. Or there's been some recent legislative changes that have sort of expanded expungement eligibility. And the most recent one involves cases where you were given what's called a stay of imposition at sentencing. And so it's a special kind of disposition that's usually reserved for either people who don't have a history or for crimes that are just less serious than the standard version. And so those cases are now eligible for seal after 5 years.
So let's go back and talk about the different types of expungement.
Yes. So there are 3 main types, and the way you go about getting those expungements differs slightly depending on each one. So there's what we call a statutory expungement, and this is a record that is eligible under the statute, meaning the right kind of disposition, it resolved the right way, and then you've gone the right number of years.
And that is dictated by the legislature.
Yes, literally in the statute. There's sort of a checkbox that we have to go through. And so to get a statutory expungement, you can either petition the court, which is the calendar that I was staffing initially, or there's something called prosecutor-led expungement. And so there is a part of the statute that essentially gives prosecuting offices, so like our office, permission to seal our own records.
And that's actually any prosecutor's office in the state.
Yes.
And I assume that is county attorneys who primarily, or at least our office, primarily prosecutes felonies.
So it's actually every office.
And city attorneys'
Yep.
offices who prosecute misdemeanors and gross
Yeah.
misdemeanors.
The lower level stuff.
So as long as the office was responsible for prosecuting the case, that office has the authority to do this.
Exactly. Essentially, we have been given permission to control our own records. And so, but that said, our power is also limited to records that are eligible under the statute. So we can't just do whatever we want with our cases. If it's one of our cases and it's eligible under the statute, then we can remove all of those barriers that we talked about that were stopping eligible folks from getting their records sealed. So we file the paperwork. There's no hearing. There's no filing fee.
Which you said, if we don't do that, it was $400.
Yeah, I believe it's just under $400. It has changed over the years. But
So it costs money if you're doing it. If you, as a person who has a record or conviction, is initiating it, costs money.
yes,
And if we do it, it does not.
exactly. And you can do it on your own and ask the court to waive that fee, but it's an additional step and you have to know that that process exists.
Sure.
So the prosecutor-led program, as you might imagine, is a much easier, not only a much easier process from just an understanding standpoint, because you're taking all of the specialized knowledge out of it, right? An individual just applies, I need a name and a date of birth, and then we sort of take it from there. As opposed to the petition-based process, which has built-in waiting periods and honestly, on the quick end, takes about 8 to 9 months. So the prosecutor-led program can happen very quickly. It can happen in a matter of weeks if all of our ducks are in a row, which, as you might imagine, can make a huge difference for someone's circumstances. And then, so those are the 2 sort of types of statutory expungement. And if your case is eligible under the statute, then there are 2 kinds of records that everybody has. There's what we call judicial branch records, and these are the ones that are maintained by the courts. So if someone were to do a public case search, that's your judicial branch record. That's what would pop up.
So that's going to be your criminal conviction or your criminal record.
Yeah, not even a
Or
conviction.
arrest,
Yeah,
too.
just the charge, whatever charges were levied against you will be, those are maintained by the courts. And then there's something that we call executive branch records. And those are records that are maintained by essentially every other criminal justice agency. So sheriff's office, community corrections, and everything in between. And so if your case is eligible under the statute, then you can seal all of those records. Every agency involved has to hide all of their records. Okay, so that's statutory expungement. That is the gold standard. That's what is best case scenario for folks. After that, we have what's called an inherent authority expungement, and that's available only by petition. And essentially what that says is if your case isn't eligible under the statute, meaning it's not the right type of disposition or you haven't gone long enough, then you can ask the court to seal their own records under their inherent authority. So the power comes from the court's ability to control their own records. So you essentially petition the court and say,
So when you say you, does that mean that's solely done by the person who wants their record expunged?
the subject of the record, yep,
Okay.
or their attorney. And so they would ask the court and say, I get, I understand my record doesn't meet the statutory requirements. Would you be willing to seal court records anyway? Right? Because the court also has the power to seal their own records. And then they say yes or no. And to be honest, usually no. It's a much harder road to climb.
Does the county attorney's office have any role in that?
We can object or agree or take no position, but other than that, no. It is up to the final decision in all of these cases is actually up to the courts.
So why do you think prosecutor or expungement in general is important and should be something that the county attorney's office does?
Well, as a lifelong prosecutor, my job is to protect public safety. And that's sort of always top of mind. And when we think about criminal records and the consequences of criminal records, not even a criminal conviction, just a criminal charge, it's truly astounding how limiting the smallest of records can be. So misdemeanor level crimes from 15 years ago are stopping people from getting apartments, from getting jobs.
And can you give us an example of what kind of misdemeanor case you're talking about?
Sure. So a misdemeanor theft, for example. So that is a theft where it's less than $250.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody has a misdemeanor theft on their record from however long ago, they've gone through their probation, they're, have moved on, and even if they haven't committed any offenses since that time, that alone is enough to stop employers from hiring them, to stop landlords from giving them apartments, to stop your ability to get a student loan if you want to go to college, a mortgage if you want to buy a home. It's truly remarkable the amount of limitations that come with the smallest of records, and not even convictions. These could just be a charge that was dismissed that will still be almost a full stop to an individual's ability to fully participate.
So I'll date myself here. So if you steal a CD, I don't know if those are still available in stores, but you said that it can go way back, right? Yeah. So if you steal a CD, or even if you're accused of stealing a CD like 10 years ago or something like that, that charge in and of itself or conviction could prevent you from doing all the things you talked about.
Yeah, from fully participating in society. And when we do that, when we limit people's ability to fully integrate into their community, to volunteer at their kids' school, to volunteer with their church, to have a career and not just a job, to get a stable housing, what we're doing is leaving them with few other options than additional criminal behavior, right?
When you said not being able to volunteer at their kids' school or church, what does a prior misdemeanor conviction have to do with that?
The vast majority of, from my understanding and my own experience volunteering with my kids' schools, you have to undergo a background check before you're allowed to interact with vulnerable populations, so children in particular, and any criminal record will remove your ability to do that.
So as you look back on your experience, what is maybe one of the most impactful expungements that you've done? Or memorable in terms of the person's response?
There's one woman who will stick with me forever. She was a very sweet older lady who was in her 60s. And I met her at our very first expungement clinic. And while we were chatting, I learned that she was essentially waiting on a promotion, a sizable one. Her income was going to increase like almost double. And what was stopping her was this 15-plus-year-old conviction on her record. And I think what's crazy is that we do this work and oftentimes it's the full impact of it is sort of lost on us because it's your day-to-day job. But it truly was like seeing her, and she broke down into tears and she was like, this is what I've been waiting for. Like I truly didn't understand the impact of the work that I was doing until you see these people who are like, this has been bothering me, hanging over my head for decades, and now it's gone. And it was so easy for me to do. But they're like, you don't, that seemed very simple for you, but this was decades of trauma for them.
And that is something that prosecutors don't typically see, because those consequences are after we're finished with their case generally.
Yeah, I have a very unique, our team has a very unique opportunity in the prosecutorial world, because you're right, very rarely do we see the 5, 10, 15 years down the road of the work that we do. Yeah, and it's been an amazing perspective for me, because it ensures that I'm going to start that over. It's given me really invaluable perspective to know that there's always a human on the other end of this, and that the decisions that we make are going to impact someone forever.
Does it change your perspective on maybe what we could be doing on the front end too, in terms of understanding the impact on the back end, that maybe there are some things that we can do to kind of insulate a person while holding them accountable, but insulate a person from some of those things that have those barriers that happen on the back end?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think taking the whole person into consideration when you are making the charging decision on the front end is how we ensure that people are held accountable and get exactly what they deserve, no more and no less. And so being able to see the impact of that, I think, just keeps it readily at the top of your mind, right? Where you're not going to make decisions just because you can. You're going to really be very, very thoughtful and make sure you're making the best decision for the specific set of circumstances.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're so welcome.
We're going to be joined by Peggy Larkin, who's going to talk to us about the Clean Slate Act and the work in the community with our community expungement clinics and other types of efforts to get out into the community. So we're joined by Peggy Larkin. Peggy, can you tell us a little bit about your work in the office?
Sure. I have been in the office since April of 2024. I joined the office after being a city prosecutor for about 6 years. My work in the office, I joined the expungement team with Nadia El Negdi, and I've been working on prosecutor-led expungement and community outreach initiatives about expungement.
So there was a lot of excitement generated by a legislative push to create the Clean Slate Act. The idea there was to have a computer automatically expunge people's records. Instead of having the person come and do a petition, and instead of our office having to do the work to expunge. That was what it was meant to do.
Right. So in theory, this would be a great program where, once your record is eligible, you do nothing. Where previously, either a prosecutor like myself would lead expungement or someone would file a petition, and a very low percentage of the community was taking advantage of that expungement process because of its difficulty. So this process was intended to be a program that just automatically would go in and seal those records that are eligible.
So how has it been in implementation?
So it's had some difficulties. For starters, it doesn't seal all the records that people would need sealed in order to move forward, find housing, find work.
So can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
When you're saying it doesn't seal all records, what records are you referring to?
Yeah. So Clean Slate Act seals 2 types of records, BCA records and court records.
Bureau of Criminal Apprehension records.
Yes.
And those are the ones that people like landlords would get a background check. So those live there.
Right. And it seals court records that are eligible. There are 11 other types that we seal through prosecutor-led expungement, like DHS licensing records, law enforcement records, nationwide records are not something that Clean Slate Act seals.
Was Clean Slate supposed to seal those and it just hasn't? Or was that kind of a gap in it, or it just isn't doing what it was designed to do?
That was a gap in the legislation. Clean Slate Act is sealing what the legislation said it would seal. But there are these other records that still impact people.
So that might be a legislative fix, and I think they've actually tried to work on that. But if we want to be able to seal those other 11 records, or 6 of them, or I'm just making that up, that has to go back to the legislature.
Correct. Or a person would have to follow the same process, either file a petition, or we can seek the others through prosecutor-led expungement.
What have been some of the other barriers with Clean Slate?
So the computer program was a brand new program that they created. When I say they, I mean the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, to seal these records. And it's had some bugs and some things to work out. So it's been a slow process. This law was signed into law in August of 2023. the sealing of the records actually started in January 1st of 2025, and it's been ongoing. So there are some records that are sealed, some that are not. And I think that's been a barrier where people maybe think their records are sealed through the Clean Slate Act, but they're not.
How does a person find out if their record was sealed through Clean Slate?
So they can go online and look up their record and see if it's there. The other,
Go online where?
it's called MCRO, which stands for Minnesota Court Records Online.
Okay.
When you can go through the web and look up your record that way, that will show some records. Then there are other records that are available only at the courthouse. So every courthouse has a terminal that you can go look up more records. For example, dismissals. You cannot see those from your web browser at home, but you might be able to see them if you go to the courthouse. So if you look in those two places and you don't see your record, it likely was sealed through Clean Slate Act. You can also go to the courthouse and ask them, and they will tell the subject of the record if their record was sealed. The BCA also would do so.
And so, as a reminder from what you said, that even if your record is sealed, we're only talking about the records kept by the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension or the court.
Yes.
So if the Department of Human Services, if you apply for a barber license or something like that, that record wasn't legislatively articulated to be sealed.
Correct. And there are other limitations. For instance, if there's an owed fine, your record may not be sealed. If it's related to a civil commitment, your record may not be sealed if there's a history of civil commitment. So there are other statutory limitations to the Clean Slate Act.
Have we seen improvement in the computer program that's doing this?
Yeah, I think as time has gone on, I have seen records be sealed. I've looked for records myself and they're not there. There are sometimes notations as it's going through the process in the court record. So the process is happening.
So probably a good reminder, the process is happening and improving all the time. At the same time, people shouldn't rely on it for necessarily expunging their records. That's something that they should follow up on and see if it actually happened. And that's only in the BCA and the court.
Correct. When you're seeking the stability of a job or housing, knowing that your record is sealed is really important. So if you have a record out there that you're hoping is sealed, definitely check for it and then follow up and seek out the other avenues to get it fully sealed.
And one of those avenues, if it was a conviction from our office, they can attend one of our community expungement clinics.
Yeah.
So I'm going to segue into that. We have had a number of community expungement clinics. Can you talk about what those look like?
Yeah. So we are always increasing our expungement clinics in the community. And as we've mentioned, there's a very low utilization of the expungement process, like less than 5%. And so we make it our goal not to sit behind a desk anymore, but to get out in the community and to offer this opportunity to have a prosecutor look at your record, determine if we have records eligible for prosecutor-led expungement, and to go ahead and start that process. We have a clinic on May 11th, and that'll be in North Minneapolis, and we're very excited about that. I also have started officing at the libraries, and so
let's slow down here.
Yeah.
So about how many community expungement clinics have we had in the last several years? Roughly
5. We've had 5 community expungement clinics.
And we've gone to South Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, Brooklyn Park or Center.
Brooklyn Center.
And I know you've done a lot of work in actually hitting the streets, passing up flyer, trying to recruit people to come into the clinic because they just haven't heard about it. And it always struck me that, okay, so even though we go out into the community, that's still information about what expungement is and how to get one, and the fact that we're there can still be a barrier for people to know what's happening because they can just walk in.
Yeah. So that's true. I've get on light rail and pass out our flyers. And I think, in our community, their access to prosecutors has been often in a courtroom where we're holding them accountable, and that's important work. This also gives a different kind of access where we're here for public safety in another way. We're here to help them seal their record, get access to something that's available to them, and again, to help them get stability, and that improves public safety.
And the clinics include other organizations that are there, like the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office has been attending.
True. That's been our efforts in the past year, is really kind of a wraparound service type of clinic. So we can seal Hennepin County cases that began as a felony, some misdemeanors, but very few. But there are a lot of other cases out there. There are misdemeanor and gross misdemeanor cases. That's where the Minneapolis City Attorney's Office comes in. We also have the Legal Revolution at most of our clinics. They do pardon work. And so some cases are just not going to be eligible for expungement. And so then we refer them over to the Legal Revolution, who can talk to them about pardon access.
So you started to mention your library office hours. Talk to us about why you thought that was important, or what inspired you to do that?
Yeah, so we held a clinic at Brookdale Library, and it was very successful. We had a great attendance turnout, and I just started to think about how libraries are a community hub, and people come there, they look for resources there. It's a trusted place, and we wanted to be there in that environment where the community is already there, and we can meet them where they're at and tell them about this service and provide reviews of their records.
So talk to me about, you now have regular office hours. Where are those? I need the piece of paper. You might have it memorized, but where will you be and when?
So I am at Central Library and Franklin Library in Minneapolis. I don't want to tell you wrong. So Franklin Library, I'm there the third Wednesday of every month from 1:30 to 4:30. And Central Library is the fourth Thursday of every month from 2 to 4:30. And so I'm there. You can stop in with a librarian and sign up, or just walk in, and I will sit and review the record, tell you if you have any records that are eligible for prosecutor-led expungement. We'll begin that process. Or we'll talk about where you're at in the waiting period, when you're going to be eligible, and then that person leaves knowing exactly when their record is eligible to be sealed, or the process is, we start that for them. I also, once a month, hold office hours at a reentry program at Minneapolis Community and Technical College, with that same goal in mind, to go where people need the service and where they are, and to review their records and help them with eligible.
And Hennepin County has a self-help center, and they help people who walk in with all kinds of civil and criminal issues. And you're going to start being there. Go ahead and talk about that.
Yes, that's in the works. We aren't holding office hours there yet, but we will hopefully soon. Essentially, they get a lot of people who stop in for all types of reasons, as you mentioned, and expungement is a large percentage of their people who are seeking that resource. They give them the paperwork to file a petition. And so, it makes sense for us to partner along with them and remove that petition-based process if we can, and help people seal those records that are eligible.
So Peggy, when you look back on your experience helping people with the expungements, what's one that stands out to you?
There are a few that stand out. One in particular, there's a woman who she was volunteering at a treatment facility. She was volunteering because she's a person in recovery who had a drug conviction, and she could not work there. So she was employing her skills, her expertise in this area, but she was volunteering because her record wouldn't allow her to be paid for that same work. So the facility knew about her past conviction, but licensing and DHS requires that, you can't work in certain fields if you have certain criminal.
Even if you have lived experience,
yes,
and you've gone through the recovery
even
process.
If you have lived experience, even if you're volunteering, providing those services, you can't work there with certain criminal convictions. So this woman we reviewed her record. We submitted her cases they were drug cases, and we submitted them for prosecutor-led expungement, and that she's now working in a treatment facility. So it's those moments where, and this is a single parent, who's in recovery, who has rehabilitated herself, and now she can work in that field, help other people, and we're all better for it.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you.
So you heard Nadia and Peggy explain how complicated the expungement can be, which is one of the reasons why the Hennepin County Attorney's Office has been creating community expungement clinics. We know that there are barriers, whether it's language or computer or just not understanding the process, and actually going out into the community and meeting people where they are can be really helpful, even if it's just giving people information about what they need to be able to obtain an expungement later on. We have one of those community expungement clinics coming up on Monday, May 11th from 1 to 7 p.m. at 1256 North Penn Avenue in Minneapolis. That is walk in, you can just walk right in and talk to one of our staff about whether your particular conviction is eligible for expungement. Thank you.